In 2016, an ambitious project was completed by the Library of Congress to digitize recordings made on wax cylinders of the Passamaquoddy people in the 1890s by American anthropologists. The return of these objects to the Passamaquoddy people in a digital audio format was an example of digital repatriation where the physical objects are still being held within traditional archives. The audio, originally recorded on the wax cylinders, like the one shown here, which was stored at Harvard's Peabody Museum for over 100 years, have the potential to provide insight into sacred ritualized practice of a people seen by many in the 1890s as savages. Here is an example of one digital repatriation effort being done in California with recordings of the Yahi people.
This is the voice of Vichy, a California Native American, the last known speaker of the Yahi language. It was recorded over 100 years ago on a wax cylinder, one of thousands archived here at the University of California, Berkeley. The collection includes more than 100 hours of audio, documenting 78 different indigenous California languages, even some that are no longer spoken. But time has taken its toll.
The existing versions of them sound terrible. They're full of noise. You can make out that there's sound. You often can't actually tell what the sound is.
Berkeley linguist Andrew Garrett is part of a team working to save these rare recordings.
I see what we're doing as creating the possibility of digital repatriation of cultural heritage to the people and communities where the knowledge was created in the first place, while still making it available for scholars.
The passing of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, or NAGPRA, in 1990 helped facilitate the repatriation of objects in physical and digital form so future generations of Americans can learn from them and embrace understanding of Native American people. However, the lack of physical possession of the artifact being digitized can allow for any digital repatriation effort to create conflicting metadata that would only cause confusion and misunderstanding. To facilitate a digital repatriation of Native American archival items free from these kinds of issues, the underlying colonization of these archives by Eurocentric forces must be understood and dismantled in a collaborative way based on cooperation among Native American people. Doing this creates a post-colonial mentality that embraces dynamic perspectives on archival materials that can foster new collaborative understanding. Before digital repatriation of the Native American artifacts can take place, it is necessary to understand that the archive's objects and the metadata attached to it were always classified through a colonizing lens that ignored Native voices. Scholar Kimberly Kristen, along with co-author Jane Anderson, in their journal entitled Towards Slow Archives, recognized that archivists need to step back from traditional archival practice and think about the ethical consequences of archival portrayal. In doing so, they note that slowness is imagined and enacted in terms of a framework that privileges restorative and reparative work that is decolonial in its logic and practice. In this, it is old archival practice that reinforces a privileging of settler, invader, colonist voices and narratives over indigenous ones. This statement by Kristen and Anderson allows us to see that terms like subject terms within metadata classifications intentionally omitted the voices of Native American people. Therefore, any digital repatriation that does not regard the inherent biases within archives will be flawed. This dynamic of flawed classification can be seen as per Christiana Krupa in her article entitled Digital Repatriation as a Decolonizing Practice in the Archaeological Archive, in the erroneous classification of Native American artifacts in modern archives. In a study in 2016 of the archives at the University of Indiana Bloomington, Krupa noted that 14 of 17 responding units of the archive contain Native American artifacts, and that Native American artifacts were identified in repositories ranging from the archives of traditional music to the campus herbarium. This disregard for the true meaning of these archival materials renders digital repatriation of these archives practically useless unless the metadata is drastically changed. In this, digital preservation policies need to be changed to ensure that the newly formed digital items are free from Eurocentric bias. This premise allows us to question other digital preservation standards, like those in the OAIS model. If we do not question and modify processes like the AIP, which contains, quote, information to help us describe and understand the objects, then any dissemination information package, or DIP, provided to researchers will be missing essential information that can contribute to their true meaning and purpose. Kristen and Anderson reinforce this when they note the eventual dispossession of archival items that can be seen in library subject terms, classification schemes, metadata fields, and within general calls for open access that refuse to grapple with histories of collections. Calls to make materials available to the public without addressing the inherent biases of standardized metadata schemes like Dublin Core will only serve to potentially increase prejudice against Native American people rather than create true understanding. Without the interjection of independent variables that understand the perspectives of Native American people, Dublin Core elements like subject and relation assigned to digital objects will not pass the scrutiny of Native American people. Another consideration that must be looked at and reconciled is the ownership status of the digital objects. The assumption that any digital repatriation results in ownership of the digital object has to always be questioned. Nicole Crawford and Darrell Jackson, in looking at the legal confusion related to their case study of the University of Wyoming's control of the artifacts of the Rapa Nui people of Easter Island, note that many institutions may consider digital repatriation as an open source outcome, where the items are owned by none or by all. Other organizations say that digital repatriation should be considered as a next level iteration and therefore possessed and owned by whoever extracted and ultimately interpreted the data. This confusion coincides with the ambiguities in the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, where cultural items and the subgroup cultural patrimony does not specifically include digital representations of items being held by archives or museums. This can be seen as per Krupa when she discusses the digital repatriation of photographs pertaining to the Angel Mound excavation in Illinois. Krupa notes that though all photos are now digitized, only a third of the images were published to an online platform, specifically preserving but restricting access to any images that were deemed culturally sensitive by consulted communities. The ambiguity in NAGPRA can cause a situation where the item is possessed by multiple groups, causing duplication and creating of dueling perspectives that can warp the digital object's value and be hurtful rather than beneficial to future generations. To some, digital repatriation could be seen as more trouble than it's worth. To disseminate a digital item that is free from any legal confusion, interfaces must be created that clarify ownership rights to digital content. So the question we can ask now is, how do we ensure that digital repatriation of Native American artifacts is free from the constraints of static metadata based on Eurocentric ideas? How do we deal with issues of ownership and allow for multiple perspectives that can grow the value of a digital item? One solution to dealing with issues regarding metadata is to apply the principles laid out in the Records Continuum Model, or RCM, that was established in the 1990s by Monash University academic Frank Upward, with input from colleagues Sue McCamish and Livia Icovino. In this model, archives can be seen in a three-dimensional landscape where archival practices are influenced by outside influences to allow the archives to grow and evolve over time. As we can see in the following chart, archival functions such as transactionality, evidentiality, record-keeping, and identity intersect with other independent dimensions denoted as create, capture, organize, and pluralize, to modify that archival function outside of its normal activity. As you move from the simple creation all the way to pluralizing of the archival process, the process is unraveled, allowing archivists to question the classifications previously made on the item's meaning and purpose within a Native American context. The following table displays the results from these intersections. For example, if we look at how pluralize affects record keeping, we can see that records show their ongoing value as collective memory by ensuring that they are part of archiving systems that can carry records beyond the life of an organization. In this, the record-keeping activity of any individual item becomes indelibly linked to the memories of Native people themselves, rather than a Eurocentric narrative. Vivian Friggs-Hosami, in her paper on the continuum's influence on archives, notes Sue McCamish's comments on pluralization in that it represents societal perspectives on record-keeping, the cultural, legal, and regulatory environment of record-keeping, which is different for every society and in every period. McCamish then notes that the capacity of a record to exist beyond the boundaries of creating entities to meet the needs of those not involved with the act precipitating record creation, capture, and organization. In this statement, McCamish sees that every artifact, either physical or digital, has the inherent potentiality to reveal its true purpose and meaning if society is open to letting the message reveal itself. In an evolving landscape, when new histories reveal new ritualized practices of Native American people, we must incorporate new historical findings into the artifacts to give them the power to change people's perspectives. With this new perspective on archives, there needed to be a way to incorporate the RCM into a collaborative application that can help illuminate digitally repatriated archives. In 2007, members of the Warramungu community in Northern Australia worked with developers Kim Christian and Craig Dietrich to create a dynamic digital repository called Makutu, which comes from a Warramungu word meaning dilly bag or a safe-keeping place for sacred materials. Key to this new open-source online system is the use of traditional knowledge labels, or TK labels, that allow members of Native communities to engage with each other in ways that are consistent with their rules of governance. This practice is aligned with a journal written by Susan Douglas titled Giving Diligence Its Due, Accessing Digital Images in Indigenous Repatriation Efforts, where she notes that archival database would benefit everyone by providing researchers with the ability to cross-reference material. This concept of cross-referencing can be applied to all kinds of digital items such as audio and video archives as well as images. The use of TK labels allows archivists to take advantage of the inherent power of archives and to illuminate people as per the ideas of the RCM. In addition, Makutu also contains a defined set of cultural protocols to allow access to the materials based on the needs of the Native community. Eric Muchalak, in her 2020 article on Makutu, notes that this new complete autonomy that Native American communities get from limiting access, where they can determine the rules of engagement with digital items. In addition, it also clears up all confusion as to possession of the digital items that NAGPRA failed to define. To see an example how Makutu is related to the RCM in the polarizing of digital objects, we can go to Makutu's website and go to the showcase option, where we can see that the Passamaquoddy people have actually utilized Makutu. So if we go to their actual individual site, we can see that the Passamaquoddy people have claimed all of those digitized objects from the Library of Congress and put them on Makutu. So if we go to these actual recordings and choose one of them, we can see that not only does the recording have have different protocols limiting access to the item, in which the creator, the collection, the type, but it also gives context to the recording itself using those TK labels that we described earlier. So in this case, this recording is linked to different battles and different events in American history. This allows for the recording not only to be seen as just a recording, but linked to other contexts in American history, giving it power. Also, the record also uses other TK labels listed here, which gives it the power to link to other historical contexts. This is a perfect example of how the ideas of the RCM were actually used in the Bakutu website and are used to actually give this sound recording some context. The digital repatriation of artifacts back to Native communities has the potential to allow for a reclaiming of the meanings of artifacts free from antiquated archival classifications. However, this process must be done in a way that is free from controversy surrounding possession of digital objects and misinterpretations on its meaning. Models like the RCM create the potential for new interpretation of Native American artifacts by questioning archival standards and practices. The creation of interfaces like Bakutu allow for new perspectives in a collaborative manner, allowing for consensus to be reached regarding digital materials. It is within this consensus that new histories are created and Native people can finally be given the dignity and respect they deserve.